Spoilers ahead. Watch out, and take care. The movie begins in 1942. The United States Navy is preparing to attack Japan, in retaliation for what happened at Pearl Harbor, sending torpedo bombers and fighter planes across the South Pacific. On the 16th of January, pilot and Chief Harold Dixon, bombardier Tony Postula, and radioman Gene Aldrich are on a patrol mission. At one point, they get separated from the other aircraft, and are unable to recover their bearings. During the patrol mission, they decide to return to the aircraft carrier. Even if they check the correct coordinates, they are unable to locate the ship. The commander orders a bomb to be dropped, to lighten the plane, and informs them that they have little fuel left. After rechecking the coordinates, they try to correct the route, but find nothing. Due to the lack of fuel, the commander then gives the order to prepare to land on the water. Since they still can't get telecommunications working, Dixon decides to make an emergency landing before they run out of fuel. The aircraft lands safely on the sea, and Dixon emerges wearing a life jacket, and pulling a life raft behind him, but his soldiers aren't faring so well. They're having problems getting out of their seats, and nearly drowning, barely escaping at the last second, which means they won't be able to collect supplies before the plane sinks. Dixon and Gene abandon their guns as well, making it simpler for them to float, but Tony is trapped. In the end, they manage to inflate the raft, although upside down, after some effort. They make a handle by tying their life jackets together and throwing them over the raft, allowing them to pull and turn the raft over, so they can finally climb on it. They must now simply wait to be detected. The next morning, Dixon and Gene talk a little about what had happened. Each man insinuated that the other had done something wrong. They choose to keep watch and stay vigilant, in case a plane comes by, as such debate leads nowhere. They're in luck, because an aircraft does fly nearby a few hours later, but it doesn't get close enough to see them, even after they take off their shirts and shake them around while screaming. The plane departs quickly, and Dixon emphasizes that this was their only chance. The plane was on a box search and would not deviate from its track, which would put them in enemy territory. It's harsh, but the war is more important than 3 soldiers. According to the procedure, they just get one quick peek. Dixon declares the raft to be a ship of the United States Navy and himself its captain, so Tony and Gene must obey his orders. They take stock of what they have in their pockets, which isn't much, just tools and miscellaneous items like cables, plus an empty water bag. Gene also carries a knife, which Dixon instructs him to keep in his pocket, to avoid cutting the raft. Dixon also instructs them to take off their shoes and throw them in the ocean, to preserve the raft and avoid wearing it off. The hours and days pass, as the soldiers strive to avoid becoming depressed due to their seclusion. To keep themselves entertained, they talk about numerous topics and occasionally sing. Tony meticulously cleans his rifle, but he also assures Gene that he'll introduce him to his sister, because they'd make a great couple. The sun is blazing during the day, so they gradually shed each layer of clothing, resulting in burns on their skin. The nights are chilly, and when they sleep, they are tortured by nightmares about drowning, or the guilt of making the error that put them in this circumstance in the first place. They don't sleep at the same time. One of them is constantly awake, and they take turns observing, in case they come across a plane or an island. During one of these watches, Dixon decides to relieve himself in his own shoe, and drink it to try to quench his thirst. One day, when they feel a beautiful breeze propelling the boat along, Dixon does some calculations to get a rough estimate of where they were going. There's a chance they'll reach some islands, but it'll take weeks, so Gene decides to try fishing to avoid starving to death. They build a hook out of wire and cord, and throw it into the sea, but whatever bites is big. When they finally regain the end of the line, the hook is gone, reminding them that there are some frightening things out there. But Gene never gives up. He simply creates a fresh hook and tosses it again, this time leaving it in the water for as long as necessary. The heat eventually gets to him, so he dons his life jacket, and leaps off the boat to cool off. Tony intends to follow him, but Dixon advises that they do it one at a time for their own protection. He also warns them that there are sharks in these seas, which scares Gene back onto the raft, and Tony into not jumping in after all. Dixon's paranoia drives him to continually ask his comrades what happened on the plane, as if he were looking for someone to blame for their plight. As the days pass, the tension among the men increases, and as a result, their position is increasingly precarious. As Tony begins to feel thirsty, Dixon tries to dissuade him from drinking from the ocean, to prevent him from doing anything foolish. Gene is about to say how many more shoes they can fill with the yellow stuff, when he is suddenly interrupted by Dixon, who shouts in triumph, he has discovered a pencil in his pocket that he had previously ignored. Now that he has this information, he can create a map, and keep track of their destination. They must keep the wind in their favor if they want to reach the island. They create a marine anchor out of one of the life jackets and some cord and some wire. This way, if the wind shifts, they won't be blown the wrong way. The other issue is that they are still thirsty. Jean teaches the other two how to pray and ask God for rain, but the weather does not change until later in the night. The men laugh as they catch as much rainfall as they can on their shirts and the water bag. Jean gets frustrated after failing to catch anything with his hook after a week at sea, so he pulls out his knife, ignoring Dixon's complaints and worrying about the raft. Jean is successful in a large manner after a few random stabs at the water. He's killed a shark, which they bring aboard the raft and open to devour the tiny fish it recently consumed. They keep the shark meat in their socks for subsequent use as bait. This little supper, however, has major consequences. Other sharks have sniffed the shark blood, and are now following them around, since they keep throwing it into the sea to keep the raft clean. So when a drowsy Jean dips his hand in the water and is bitten one night, fortunately, he pulls it out before losing it, and Dixon wraps it up in Tony's bandana, but the harm has been done. 2 weeks have gone by since the accident, and while they haven't caught another fish like the shark, they do have one more day of rain to replenish their water bag. Tony starts looking at his rifle with some negative thoughts in his head, as hope begins to fade. Jean grabs it from him, just as a bird lands on their raft and shoots it, causing the body to collapse into the sea. Dixon rushes in to get it, but the bird's blood has piqued the curiosity of a shark as well. The boys try to fire it, but the gun jams, forcing Dixon to swim as fast as he can. Fortunately, he makes it back to the raft before being captured, and they now have bird meat to eat, which they enjoy. Tony throws the bullets into the water when he discovers that the gun no longer works, although he is concerned that the others may interpret this action as a sign of giving up. On the 20th day, and when Dixon is finally able to rest, he discovers that the others have been asleep, and there has been no guard. However, Jean says that the effort is futile, because there has been no wind for the past 2 days, and the islands are not approaching. In addition, he does not understand how Dixon could have calculated their position, since their plane is missing, and they do not even know where they started looking for them. By now, desperate Jean thinks Dixon is responsible for the plane's disappearance, because he is the one who was taking them out of range. After much shouting and swearing, Dixon discloses that he was expecting to see islands a few days ago, therefore their course is off. His memory returns, and he recalls what happened on the plane. It turns out that he had fallen asleep. It was only a few minutes, but it was enough time for them to miss their turn. He apologizes for his error, knowing he will never be able to make amends. A sad mood falls on the raft. Jean picks up the chart, and declares that while it isn't perfect, it is their last hope of returning home. When Tony makes a joke about creating their own wind, Dixon gets an idea. He chops off the soles of his shoes using Jean's knife, which they now use to row. A month after the incident, they finally get some rain. But this isn't just any rain, it's a full-fledged raging storm, complete with lightning. The waves get powerful and forceful, eventually flipping the raft. The guys drown and lose their few tools, including their rowing shoes, but the raft is more vital. They find each other by clinging onto it, and with the help of the wind, they turn the raft back into position, hopping on it and huddling close for warmth, until the storm passes. The rain has stopped this morning, but the men are too exhausted to do anything but sleep. The next morning, they lie half dead in the sun, having lost all their belongings in the storm. Having lost all hope, their conversation becomes depressing. They discuss what to do with the body if one of them dies. They begin to jokingly imagine how they will carve and eat the bodies without a knife. The commander says that if they survive, he will give them references if his superiors will listen to him at the court-martial. They wonder which court he is referring to, since they still don't know who is to blame for the plane situation. However, they will not give up their commander. After hearing this, Harold starts crying. Tony gets up and starts rowing with his hands. Tired of this gloomy atmosphere, and convinced that they've come too far to give up now, Tony persuades his pals to do the same. This exhausts them so much that Dixon does what he swore they wouldn't do. He drinks seawater, and Tony falls asleep so deeply that they think he's dead for a time. When Jean notices something green in the distance, he jumps to his feet. They've finally found an island. Desperate enough not to care whether it is captured by the enemy, the soldiers begin rowing with their hands until they reach the shore waves, which push them the final stretch of the way onto the beach. When they arrive on the island, the waves throw them ashore, and they lie down on the blessed land. The commander looks closely, and sees that the island is not Japanese, and that there are small buildings. They get up, take one last look at their boat, and leave. Seeing 2 shacks nearby, they make their way there on wobbly legs. This arrival took place on February 20th, after 34 days at sea and sailing their raft for over 1,000 kilometers. When they are rescued, Dixon is given the Navy Cross for bringing his crew to safety, but he never flies another combat mission again. Tony is unable to pursue a career in the Navy, due to his injuries, and when he died in 1986, his ashes are spread at sea. Jean works as a radio operator during the war, and marries Tony's sister in 1946. The end. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Turn on the notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out.